mic check, please.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ducks Unlimited podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jennings.
I'm your host, Dr. Mike Brasher.
My name is John Gordon. I'll be your host.
And I'm your host, Katie Burke.
Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America. We bring the resource to you, the DU Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ducks Unlimited podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jennings. Joining me in studio today is my co-host, Dr. Mike Brasher. What's going on?
I'm doing all right, Chris. It's been a while since we've sat down in the room together here to record one of these.
It has. Busy duck season. Everyone's busy with work, trying to squeeze some duck hunts in. But no, it's good to be in the studio with you. Today's show, we are going to do some, we're going to just kind of discuss some amazing waterfowl facts. And this is one of the most popular pieces of content that we've had on our website. And it's been on there for a while. But some of these facts are just cool. And I thought that, maybe if you and I could just sit down and chat about some of these cool little facts, it'll give people something to talk about in the duck blind. Hey, you know what the smallest...
Did you know?
Yeah, did you know? Did you know this? So it's rather than kind of when we did our Mythbusters, episode, this is kind of just fun facts for you to share. But before we kick that off, you had something you wanted to bring up.
I did, and we probably don't do as much of this as we need to. The podcast has grown over the past, what have we been doing this now? 3 years, three and a half, something like that. And so we certainly appreciate all our loyal listeners, as they say, and we want to thank you for that. And the other thing that I guess we probably need to do a little bit more often is ask people to take some time to rate the podcast. And if you're feeling really froggy, go ahead and review the podcast as well. Those are important from a kind of podcast visibility standpoint. And think about it this way: when you do those things, you are contributing to wetlands conservation and the message that Ducks Unlimited is trying to get out there. So take some time now, stop this episode and rate and review the podcast, and keep listening. Keep listening to it. We appreciate everybody's support.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is important, getting that support, people rate, review. Definitely want you guys to subscribe to it.
Trying to get inside all those algorithms and how they work, right?
There you go. Trying to fight the system.
You got to play the game. If you're in it, you got to play the game. You got to rate, review, get that visibility up there.
Absolutely. Well, cool. That's a good reminder for everybody. But let's go ahead and kick this show off. Let's, we're going to start. I'm going to start out with one. And this is, something that you and I have even talked about, even not specifically, but just like, what ducks eat's always a good conversation. And I got a cool fact here, and this is called high protein diet. So I'm just going to go ahead and just kind of read through this fact, and then we can chat about it, I guess. So female wood ducks must ingest 75 grams, that's 2.6 ounces of invertebrates to obtain enough protein and minerals to produce one egg. To acquire these nutrients, the bird must consume more than 300 invertebrates an hour for 8 straight hours. That's a lot of invertebrates these things are eating. So kind of explain what this process is and why they have to eat so much.
The first thing that comes to mind, and it's probably going to be true on a lot of these, is I'd like to see the spreadsheet or the scratch pad that Mike Checkett and our other biologists used to calculate some of these things. They would have gotten this information from published studies of wood ducks or other ducks as we go through here. But, this is like an example, kind of given a certain type of invertebrate that has a certain protein content in it, it would equate to this. And of course, you can calculate the protein content of an egg, and those types of studies have been done. And so from that, once you get those pieces of information, it's kind of easy to do the math and calculate.
Yeah.
You need this much protein to produce an egg, and if there's this much protein in this type of invertebrate, then they have to do this and this and this. And so, protein is important for a lot of different reasons in waterfowl. One of feather structures, egg production, muscles, all those types of things. I will kind of give a promo here on this episode. We have an forthcoming article in the Ducks Unlimited magazine. I think the working title is Movable Feast. The authors on that are Dr. Joe Lancaster and Dr. Ryan Askren. And I've seen a draft of that article. They did a fantastic job.
So that should be in the March-April issue.
March-April. It's a fantastic article and talking about how the diets of waterfowl differ across species, but then also how they differ throughout the annual cycle. And this is kind of relevant here to this because it's high protein. That a lot of waterfowl shift their diet to a higher protein content as they get closer to that breeding season. Then there's some difference between the way ducks do it and geese do it, and kind of depending on their egg investment strategy. And we've capital versus income breeders. We've talked about some of that with past guests. And so, that's just 300 invertebrates an hour for 8 hours in this particular example. That is a lot. Now,
that's a lot.
If they get a hold of a bigger invertebrate, or,
there's probably so many variables this thing.
That's right.
Yeah. But these are just cool little fun facts. That's
right.
a lot. That's a lot of invertebrates to produce one egg. So it's pretty impressive.
And I'll also say, never pass up an opportunity to emphasize the importance of a balanced diet. I did air quotes there. People can't see that. A balanced diet for waterfowl. Carbohydrates, energy in the form of various seeds and agricultural crops are super important to help fuel that migration. But invertebrates that provide the protein, that provide all these other essential minerals and nutrients come from these other more natural habitats or more natural vegetation communities. And so that's why repeatedly when we talk about how to create a landscape that's attractive and suitable to waterfowl, it needs to encompass a lot of different types of habitats so that it produces that balanced diet.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, we'll go on to the next one here. And we've got a long list of these, and people can visit this on ducks.org and go through all of them. We're not going to go through every single little fun fact. But this fact here is called supersize, and this is just kind of explaining that the largest of North America's waterfowl is the trumpeter swan. And a trumpeter swan can tip the scales at more than 35 pounds. Weighing as much as 6 pounds, the common eider is the largest duck species in the Northern Hemisphere. So you've got the largest waterfowl species is the trumpeter swan, more than 35 pounds. And the largest duck species is the common eider. So
You ever hunted eider?
I have. Yeah, I have.
Get you a common eider?
I did. Yeah, I hunted up in Maine several years ago. That's a fun little hunt. You should do it.
Yeah, I want to. Yeah, so this is pretty cool. You can measure largest based using a number of different metrics. Whenever I first saw the title of this, I thought about a fast food restaurant, supersize it. But that's actually not what it's about. So yeah, it's trumpeter swans, massive bird. I don't have a whole lot of experience with common eiders, as I just talked about. The other thing that I did look up here, one of the other ways that people measure the size of birds is like wingspan. Mm-hmm. Do you know, I'll throw this on you here. Do you know which bird species in North America has the largest wingspan? Not talking just waterfowl, but bird.
I don't. A golden eagle.
Oh, you're close. California condor.
Oh, I almost said condor.
It's like 11 and a half feet or something like that.
I thought that was
just
the first thing that
incredible.
popped in my head, and I changed my mind.
And, whenever I looked into this, I thought that trumpeter swan might give those birds a run for their money, but I think the trumpeter swan wingspan is 6.5, 7.5 feet, something like that. Mm-hmm. The exact figure is kind of escaping me right now, but you got a California condor, 11 and a half, I think is what it was.
Wow.
Crazy. Massive. I mean, that's... and then the golden eagle and bald eagle are up there as well. White pelican is up there also. But yeah, a lot of cool stuff. In terms of just how large those birds are. Yeah,
and I think a lot of people assume that the swan is probably the largest waterfowl species, but with the common eiders not being as common to waterfowl hunters throughout the country, they probably don't have the idea of how big those common eiders are. Yeah. So that's a cool little fun fact for someone to share in the duck blind.
Yeah, one of the other species of waterfowl that I find sort of deceptive in terms of its size and maybe mass once you get it in hand relative to its size when you see it on the wing are whistling ducks. Mm-hmm. You ever had your hands on a whistling duck? It's like you would think they're a rather heavy bird, but in fact you get them in hand, they're tiny, kind of feel tiny. I don't actually know what the mass on that is. I probably should have looked that up, but I would guess somewhere between a gadwall and a mallard. I mean, they're not.
Yeah.
But they take up a lot of space.
They look big, yeah,
They
for
do.
sure. The next one we've got here is another wood duck. I guess I don't even know what to
Factoid.
refer. Factoid. There you go. I was going to call them amazing
Fun
facts.
fowl facts.
So this was called double duty, and wood ducks are the only North American waterfowl known to regularly raise 2 broods in 1 year. Mild temperatures enable wood ducks in the south to begin nesting as early as late January, and studies of southern wood ducks have found that more than 11% of females may produce 2 broods in a single season. Now, this time of year, we're pushing mid-January right now, so people keep that in mind. If you're monitoring or putting up wood duck boxes, you should probably go ahead and get out there and start cleaning them out this time of year, especially in the south. So
That's right.
You had a couple comments on this as well.
Well, it's just that it's not very common. It double brooding where they produce 2 broods of ducklings. One of the other, maybe I'm trying to think. I don't think there's any record of mottle ducks doing it. You think about other ducks that would have the opportunity to do so. Mottle ducks would be in there because they breed at such extreme southern locations, the Gulf Coast and then peninsular Florida. I mean, I would imagine there's some that will do that, but there's not a lot of records of it. Wood ducks are also a bit easier to study because they take so readily to artificial nest boxes. I mean, that's why we know so much about them, is that it's easy to gain access to the nesting hens, to the and to the eggs and all that kind of stuff. But there are a lot of, and I guess we should clarify, this is not to be confused with renesting. We're actually talking about birds that are able to raise 2 broods. Now, there's kind of different variations of that, and I'll confess to not knowing exactly the answer here, but I don't know if, as it's defined here, it means that the hens took that brood to completion, like to flight stage. I think it does. I think that true double brooding, I think that's what it refers to. There's some instances where and these would be a little more common, where a hen can hatch a clutch of eggs, take the broods to the water, and then they all get gobbled up by a largemouth bass or cottonmouth or alligator or something, and then they would go and renest and do another brood. I'm not sure if there's a technical difference in that. A lot of my kind of research science counterparts out there, you're free to send me an email, correct me or educate me on that. But true double brooding, I think, would be raising 2 flight stage, 2 broods in the same year, and that's just incredibly rare because of the time and energy that it takes. But renesting is something a little bit, it's certainly more common across the waterfowl, or across duck species anyway.
Yeah, and that's just a good reminder that we need to do a species profile on the wood duck. We've not done that yet. So.
Yeah, no, I've got my person in mind. Just need to get him here.
Awesome. So the next one is called sound carries. So both common and Barrow's goldeneyes are often called whistlers. On cold, windless days, the resonant whistling sound produced by goldeneyes' rapidly beating wings can be heard more than a half a mile away. That's a pretty cool fact. So it's not actually them vocally whistling. It's actually their wings beat.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yep. And this is another group of species, a couple of species here that I don't have a whole lot of firsthand experience with, either doing research or hunting or even being in places that where they're commonly found. This one was interesting because just this past week I received a text message from Derek Christians, our campus waterfowl leader, and he was out in Idaho, I think, and they were having the folks that he was hunting with were having a conversation about goldeneyes, and he sent me a text asking, how do they make that whistling sound, with their, how do they vocalize and make that whistling sound? I'm like, well, I don't actually know. Let me look into that a little bit. So I was able to, I did, and it's like, it's the wings that actually create the wind going across the wings that create the whistling sound, not a vocalization. So just sort of an interesting, another interesting intersection of the things that we're talking about, and a question that I get from people every now and then.
Yeah, I'm sure that we always joke around that the common goldeneye hen is probably the least identified duck. We always get emails like, hey, what's this duck? Most of the time, if somebody doesn't know what the duck is, it's typically a hen goldeneye, common, because people don't see a ton of them, and then they get it in hand and they're like, what is this?
Yeah.
So that's a good little fun fact as well.
The idea that wind moving across the wings of birds will create a sound probably shouldn't be a foreign concept to waterfowl hunters or dove hunters. Doves have a very distinctive sound. That's exactly
It's
whenever
my dove
they
flying away sound.
Whenever they fly off. There's a video out there. For whether it be TikTok, Instagram, Matt Harrison. I'd seen it a few months ago. Matt Harrison actually came across it just last week and sent it to me. It was just an amazing video demonstrating the difference in sound that is created by different birds, whenever they're in flight. Yeah. And I forget the species that they're comparing. One is, I'm just going to make some up. Maybe one is a pigeon. Maybe one is some type of, I forget what, was some type of passerine, let's say. And then the final one, which is the coolest part of it, is an owl. I think it's a barn owl, if I'm remembering this correctly. It's been a while since I watched the video. The point of it was to demonstrate exactly how quiet the wings of owls are. It's astounding. So folks should do themselves a favor and go online. And I think if you Google something like how does an owl fly silently or something like that video will probably come up, and it's remarkable. But it just kind of shows you, I mean, owls are just like incredibly silent. And of course, they're predatory birds at night, and they need to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Owls are awesome. So the next one, and the funny thing is we did this one as a fun fact on TikTok not too long ago. Our social media coordinator kind of created a video around this, and it just blew up and had like 1 million views. But it's a cool little fun fact. So this is called gold rush. And so waterfowl ingest small particles of stone, gravel, and sand, which are kept in their gizzard to help them grind up hard foods like grain, acorns, and clams. In 1911, a gold rush was spurred in western Nebraska after hunters found small gold nuggets in the gizzards of ducks they had shot. The source of these gold nuggets, however, was never discovered. So they're just out there picking up gold somewhere and spurred an entire gold rush. So I thought that was pretty cool. So
my question is, do you believe this one?
No, not really.
I mean, 1911, how many waterfowl hunters, I mean, maybe they did that because you think they were eating the gizzards? I mean, at that time, think about that.
Probably.
1911, market hunting days, still some of that going on. Maybe so. Trying to think of...
How could you duck hunt in 1911? You couldn't even post your Instagram picture of your big pile of ducks,
Well, yeah.
Duh.
So that kind of leads my brain down an interesting road. In 1911, did they use the gizzards in... I would imagine they did. If you're a commercial hunter, you're going to use every part of the bird that you can. So that would make sense. Whenever I first read this, I'm like, how many people are out there 1911 actually cleaning the gizzards of the ducks that they're harvesting? But if it's market hunting kind of based, if there's still some of that going on at that time, I know they were trying to kind of wind that down at that time, but. Yeah.
You got to think there's a lot of people out there kind of on the edge of a gold rush at that time.
No.
Yeah, I mean, people are looking probably a lot more than they are now.
Maybe so.
So maybe that's what it was. I think this is just a cool fun fact. I don't know. Again.
It would be. And if anybody out there knows anything more about it, hey, shoot us an email.
Yeah, absolutely.
dupodcast@ducks.org.
So
just don't have it come from the Ducks Unlimited website. We can probably find that ourselves.
Yeah, we can find that. Before we get into deadbeat ducks, let's go ahead and take a quick break, and we'll come right back and we'll do 5 or 6 more of these cool facts.
That sounds good to me.
Everybody, we're back, and we have amazing waterfowl facts. I've got my co-host, Dr. Mike Brasher, here, kind of breaking down some of these fun facts. The last one we just did, the gold rush, he does not believe. He thinks that was a lie.
I wouldn't go that far.
You question it. That's your job.
Yeah, I'm skeptical.
So the next one's called deadbeat ducks, and I'll just go ahead and read through this, and then you can kind of break it down on however you want. So several waterfowl, including redheads, canvasbacks, wood ducks, and ruddy ducks, hooded mergansers, and snow geese, pursue a breeding strategy known as nest parasitism, which we've just talked on the podcast before about this. And this is where females lay eggs in the nests of other females of the same species. Some wood duck nest boxes have been found with as many as 50 eggs laid by multiple hens. Female redheads regularly lay eggs in the nests of other duck species. In one study conducted on Manitoba's Delta Marsh, more than 90% of canvasback nests contained redhead eggs. The unsuspecting foster hens raised the redhead ducklings as their own. So we've talked about this before, especially with redheads. We had a conversation about black-bellied whistling ducks. We've had some discussions about this nest parasitism, but what did you want to add to this?
Well, the first was what you just did, that black-bellied whistling ducks are not in this list. They are becoming one of the most well-known nest parasitizing species because they're becoming more common, widespread, abundant. But yes, all these others, especially redheads, wood ducks, hood and mergansers, they're some of the most notorious. And then once you get outside the waterfowl field, there's other species that do the same: cuckoos, brown-headed cowbirds, etc. Also known as brood parasitism, but it actually occurs by laying the egg in the nest of another individual. You know, this is something that waterfowl researchers have known about for a long time, but it's cool that it's like we're now in this era of old questions are new again, I guess you could say, because of the new technologies that are being applied to some of these questions to learn even more about the phenomenon and what we could do years ago. Remember, this was written like 25 years ago, I think.
Yeah, probably at least.
We probably decided. And now, we've talked about this with John Eady and a few other folks as well. They're using RFID readers to identify the individual wood ducks that are going into all these different nest boxes, and they can also use DNA testing to identify the parents of that are producing the eggs, and they can, to a degree never before or not previously really determine how many of these eggs are laid by different hens or are fathered by different male ducks or geese, if in studies that may be occurring out there. So anyway, it's just we're learning more about it. I've seen some proposals here recently that have come across my desk that are, I think, red-breasted mergansers will, although not a cavity nester, will engage in this same type of parasitism. There's a study at LSU looking at the kind of ecological reproductive consequences or benefits of nest parasitism, brood parasitism, to the host individual. And so it's like there's a lot of different studies going on, some basic biology that's being covered in some of this research, and other it's just like cool.
Yeah,
cool
and
stuff.
I think that's a good opportunity, from your perspective, and this is right up your alley for what you do, but really the science and the technology has changed so much in all of this. And I think it's just kind of cool to point out that, we're learning so much more about waterfowl all the time that, like when this article was written 20 years ago, that didn't have some of this technology.
Yep.
So, which is why I'm going to read this next one, although you did not have it on your list.
Okay.
But I think it's an awesome fun fact.
Okay.
And I guarantee that this one has probably changed based on technology. So this was called nonstop flight. And the long-distance flying champions of all waterfowl are black brant, which migrate nonstop from coastal Alaska to their wintering grounds in Baja, California, a journey of roughly 3,000 miles. And they do it in just 60 to 72 hours. So that is booking it. I mean, that's a long flight. But what's cool is these birds lose almost half their body weight during this marathon flight. Another little fact they threw in here was pintails raised in Alaska and winter in Hawaii make a similar trans-Pacific flight of about 2,000 miles. So the reason why I wanted to point this one out, just because we kind of were alluding to that part of the conversation where, technology has changed so much and benefited waterfowl research and science, that this, do you believe this is still correct or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I do, because we recently had, I think, 2 episodes on brant.
Yeah.
And the breeding grounds and the sort of terminal Mexico wintering grounds for this species haven't really changed much. And it's the way this was originally sort of discovered. It's like birds left Eisenbeck Lagoon, and then they show up in Mexico, and those type of that departure and that arrival were kind of documented in a rudimentary way through people calling one another and saying, all right, our birds are starting to leave, and then somebody else down in Baja saying 2 or 3 days later, well, they're starting to arrive. Now, they weren't tracking individual birds, I don't think. So that's the way that it has changed, is we're able to confirm that, if you will, with the tracking of individual birds, either through geolocators or through actual GPS tracking devices. And so, yeah, there's a lot of that's been confirmed. Yeah, it's Alaska, not Alaskan, that didn't sound right when I said it, Atlantic brant take on similar long-distance migrations, but they, or at least in terms of the total distance, maybe it's a little bit shorter, when you actually do the math, but they kind of stop midway on southern James Bay and for a staging area, but then they continue on to the eastern shore, New York, New Jersey, and brant are incredible birds. When you look at the shape of their wing, they're built for flight. They're built for long distance flight, and it's pretty cool. They're another species that's getting a fair bit of research attention right now because of some of the vulnerabilities that they're subject to in terms of changing climatic conditions and changing environmental conditions on their breeding grounds as well as their wintering grounds. So, and the fact that they are so closely tied to a few areas and that they make these long distance migrations, it sort of increases their vulnerability to some of the challenges that they face.
Yeah, they're impressive birds for sure.
And they taste, Pacific brant tastes fantastic. I've heard different stories about Atlantic brant.
You just went up there and hunted brant.
Did. Eisenbeck Lagoon, Cold Bay, Alaska.
Did you eat one while you're up there?
Absolutely. Wonderful.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
That's
wonderful.
cool.
I still have some here with me. Here in Tennessee, not here in the office.
Not here in the studio.
That's right.
So our next little fun fact is called living color. And I'll go ahead and read it real quick. The coloration of waterfowl plumage is produced in 2 ways, by pigments or by physical structure of the feathers. The 2 main types of pigments, known as melanins, did I say that correctly?
Melanins, yeah.
Melanins and lipochromes produce black, brown, red, yellow, green, and violet shades. The appearance of blue and iridescent colors results from these pigments in combination with fine feather structures. This explains why some waterfowl feathers appear to change color as they are moved in the sunlight.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add on this other than just to say this is something that a lot of people probably don't realize, is that some of the iridescent colors that they're seeing are structural in basis and not an actual kind of color. And again, my ability to talk about this from a position of expertise kind of falls apart pretty quick because I'm not good in this area, even talking about it in the correct terms. The other reason I wanted to kind of talk about this is we'll sort of do a pitch out there to the listeners. If there is someone that is an expert in avian coloration and they want to come on and talk about this and how these things are produced, how diet plays a role in the coloration, give us a shout. dupodcast@ducks.org. We'd love to set something up, have you come on and talk with us about your expertise, coloration in bird feathers. It'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, that'd be a great conversation. So the next one we've got is called Taster's Choice, and I want to figure out how you get to be one of the researchers on this little fact here. But so in the fall, wood ducks largely feed on acorns.
You thought it was going to be about how ducks taste, didn't you?
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
So in the fall, wood ducks largely feed on acorns in flooded bottomlands. Researchers who conducted a taste test, I did air quotes there too, on captive wood ducks found the birds preferred tiny willow oak acorns over larger acorns produced by other oak species. Biologists have found as many as 15 pin oak acorns packed into the gizzard and esophagus of a wood duck.
It surprises me that occasionally I hear people still questioning whether wood ducks and mallards eat acorns.
Yeah, why would you question that?
I don't know. It's like, why else do you think mallards go into flooded bottomland hardwood forest by the tens or hundreds of thousands or millions, when you look across the overall landscape. They eat acorns. And this was a study. It was actually conducted, I'm guessing this is the one they're referencing, that was conducted at a captive facility down the road at Mississippi State University. Dr. Rick Kaminsky and some of his graduate students were involved in this one. I'm familiar with it, and it was actually pretty cool. So the taste test was not like of the birds themselves. It was a feeding trial. That's the more technical way to describe that.
Taste test in air quotes.
And so what they did is they offered wood ducks in captivity the choice of different types of acorns, and they found that acorns consistently preferred these willow oak, maybe water oak, and pin oaks, and they avoided the consumption of some of these larger species of oaks. I forget which other species they tested, but I'm going to guess overcup oak, let's say bur oak, they're larger, whatever. And they did some additional analyses on the on those acorns to find out, well, exactly why is that. And so they ended up preferring, I think there were even some acorns that are about the same size that they avoided. But and Brian Davis, if we ever get him on here, he can tell us all about this. But they ended up doing some analysis of those acorns, and they found that the ones that they preferred are those with a high meat to shell ratio. In other words, the shell on the acorn is really thin, and therefore it has proportionally a lot of meat. And so, it makes sense, right?
Absolutely.
Now, how are they able to identify those specific acorns in muddy water or whatever the little feeding trial situation was? That in itself speaks to another fascinating fact about waterfowl and their tactile abilities with their bill. It's a subject for another day. But this finding has very important implications for some of the work that Ducks Unlimited and Arkansas Game and Fish Commission are doing right now. And the reason why they are concerned about the decline and the changing forest community in some of Arkansas's green tree reservoirs and green tree reservoirs elsewhere is because these most preferred acorns, as determined from these feeding trials, are also the species of oak trees that are among the least water tolerant. And kind of given the long-term flooding of green tree reservoirs and kind of the way the length and duration and depth that they've been managed for decades has kind of causing a shift in the forest community composition, where that we're seeing a decline in the number of these willow oak and water oak trees and nut all oak, and instead it's leading to it's favoring the more water tolerant, like nut all oak, maybe not bur oak, but at least nut all oak, overcup oak, which are not as preferred by waterfowl. So this is a lot of information there, but we've talked about that before, the GTR work in Arkansas. But this research here, sort of foundational to helping us understand the consequences of some of the actions or some of the things that are happening on the landscape today.
Cool. Yeah, that's very cool. And I got another little fun fact here, and I'm going to read this one. You didn't have it on your list, but I thought it was pretty interesting. Excuse me. So in January of 1999, a tornado and violent hailstorm deposited more than 3,000 dead waterfowl across a 7-mile-long swath in eastern Arkansas. This is, I thought it was just kind of a cool fact. Somebody had documented this, obviously. But it also goes to show that how, waterfowl, especially in migration and wintering areas, are highly susceptible to impacts of weather. And we typically don't think of like tornado and hailstorm thing, but I just thought this was pretty cool. I wonder how they found these 3,000 dead waterfowl. They're saying across a 7-mile-long swath. So someone must have just followed the trail of dead waterfowl. It's kind of interesting.
It reminds me of, and I kind of reference these type of observations mentally. Occasionally my wife will ask me if it's a big storm coming through, it's real windy or it's a tornado or whatever, and my wife will just kind of say, well, what are all the birds doing and how do they survive all this these situations? And I mean, the truth is some of them don't. They're out there in the wild having to endure all of the different risk that Mother Nature throws at them, and sometimes they lose. Sometimes these storms do get the better of waterfowl, whether it be a tornado, whether it be a hailstorm. You hear about it more with hailstorms than you do with tornadoes. And I mean, hailstorms and tornadoes are kind of related, but there's more hailstorms than you can have a hailstorm without a tornado. And so it's like almost every year you will hear some isolated report of a hailstorm causing mortality for some number of waterfowl. Or other kind of weather events forcing a flock of migrant geese or ducks to the ground, and so those types of things aren't unusual either. Dense fog and a whole host of other things, and when you get into the passerine migration, all the little songbirds, boy, they encounter even greater risks in flight during migration, and these kind of storms as well for them. So yeah, it's weather can take a toll at some scales on waterfowl. It's not just hunters and predators that are responsible for mortality in waterfowl.
Yeah, it's just add it to the list of dangers of being a duck, I guess.
That's right.
So our next one here is called fowl infidelity. You had this one checked off. I'm sure you have some additional information to add to this, but I'll go ahead and read this little fact. Genetic analysis of mallard broods has shown that many clutches include eggs that were fertilized by different drakes. Biologists speculate that hens may actually seek multiple mates to ensure their clutches will be successfully fertilized. This behavior also produces greater genetic variation among broods.
Yeah, this kind of gets into the area of the reproductive strategies of waterfowl, mating systems of waterfowl, and as well as it references here, genetic analysis. Genetic analysis of this type has been around for a couple of decades, and they've been able to dig into some of this. It's easier to do now. You can get more information from genetic samples or from tissue samples, and so yes, we've known that there's kind of multiple paternity in duck nest. Exactly, is that evolutionarily advantageous for the female? Are the females actively soliciting those kind of extra pair copulations as they're called, or are the males being more of the aggressor, and it's totally unwanted behavior by the female? I'm not actually sure where the latest studies, what the latest studies are suggesting on that, but I'm certain there are folks out there that are kind of deep into the evolutionary theory of this and are studying it, and maybe they could, again, hey, if you're one of those people that study this, shoot us an email, dupodcast@ducks.org. These type of fun facts can lead to a little more detailed conversation.
Yeah. So we're basically using this show to solicit.
There you go. And talk about some of the research that people, and the ways that people are trying to study this. It's when you dig into the details of like how they set up the experiments, how they they craft the hypothesis, and how they collect the data to test that. I mean, that stuff can be really cool itself, as long as we don't get like too deep. That's the risk with me.
You get too technical.
That's right.
You bore me. So the next one here, the next little fun fact, and you don't have it checked off on your list, and you probably
throwing some curveballs.
Yeah, throwing some curveballs, okay. But this also leads to the conversation that this data that we have here, these facts, could potentially be out of date, and we probably need to update this. This one's called Old Birds. And the oldest known duck to be taken by a hunter was a canvasback harvested at the ripe old age of 29. That's an old canvasback. And again, like you said, this was written 20 years ago, so this obviously could have changed. But then another little fact to go with it, the oldest known goose to be taken by a hunter was a Canada goose of the same age, 29. Again, that's a pretty old goose.
So I looked this up. The USGS Bird Banding Lab maintains a table of the oldest known banded birds, recovered banded birds on their website. And it covers a plethora of bird species, not just waterfowl. I didn't find this canvasback record in there. I think the oldest record that I found for a duck, and maybe I just missed it, was 25, 26, 27, something like that. And I forget which species it was. There were several records, however, of older geese than the 29-year-old Canada goose. I want to say a 34-year-old white front. I mean, that's...
Oh, wow. a Grandpa White front there.
Amazing, you know?
Yeah.
Just amazing. And yeah, so it's really cool. I encourage you to, if you got some time, want to check out the longevity records based on band recoveries for different species of birds. Just do a quick search, USGS Bird Banding Lab, longevity records, something like that. And it'll take you there. It's pretty cool to peruse that. And I think it even it has some other information there associated with each of those records. So, and the other thing that you'll notice, generally speaking, the larger birds are going to be the ones that live the longer. I mean, we're looking at longevity record type table here, right? So it's not true statistics of longevity or average lifespan, but average lifespan correlates with body size. And so geese, swans, they're going to be the more longer lived species. The smaller birds, green-winged teal, blue-winged teal, they're going to be at the other end of the gradient there. So that's, how long these birds live, that's always cool little thing to study.
Yeah, that's awesome. And again, this looks like we're going to have to update some of our facts that we have here.
Sure.
So the next one is called a heron whodunit, and I thought that was a good little name for it. But, this kind of reminds me of a story that you told back when we originally started doing this podcast.
Whatever it is, I made it up.
Yeah, you probably
totally
lied.
False.
About you had a transmitter or something on a duckling, and it got eaten by a coyote, and you could track it, and the coyote's running away, and you can track the coyote. It was basically in the coyote's stomach.
That's right.
But this one,
and I later found it in the coyote's poop. Found the transmitter. No
found
kidding,
the transmitter.
Yep.
So this heron whodunit. So in one study on the survival of wood duck ducklings, great blue herons ate 10 of the 48 ducklings fitted with radio transmitters. When a researcher discovered that one of the transmitter signals was originating from a live heron, the biologist used his receiver to track the heron to its roost site, where it regurgitated the transmitter. So at least you didn't, your coyote didn't regurgitate it. You actually had to dig through the poop.
I didn't really dig through the poop. Maybe I did. I guess I did.
You did.
So this factoid, this fun fowl fact, comes from our good friend down the road, Dr. Brian Davis. Has done a lot of research on wood ducks. And I actually remember I was at Mississippi State when he was doing the research in which he discovered this. And at least I'd be 99% certain that this is that Brian's study is the one that's being referenced here with this little fact. And it was what he discovered is exactly as you described. It was this one heron that was responsible for eating these ducklings. And so Brian concluded that this heron had developed a search image, or just kind of in more layman's terms, just kind of figured out that, hey, there's going to be little tiny ducklings come popping out of these structures. Let me go sit on them and watch for the ducklings to come out of there.
It's like a feeding station.
The heron became a specialist on wood ducklings. That was at the Noxubee National Wildlife Refuge there in east central Mississippi. At least I'm pretty sure that's where that one. Brian's had several studies across the several study sites, but I think that was happening there at Noxubee. That's also where he had a lot of cottonmouths eating some of these ducklings. I mean, ducklings have a tough go of it, man.
Oh yeah, everything's true. We've talked about that before.
Bass.
Yeah. All right, so I've got a couple more, and we'll go ahead and get out of here on this. So one is the speed record. So the fastest duck ever recorded was a red-breasted merganser that attained a top airspeed of 100 miles per hour while being pursued by an airplane. This eclipsed the previous speed record held by a canvasback, clocked at 72 miles per hour. Blue-wing and green-winged teal, thought by many hunters to be the fastest ducks, are actually among the slowest, having a typical flight speed of only 30 miles per hour. So, that we've talked about that before, especially when we did the blue-winged teal species profile. They're acrobatic, they're small. Everyone seems to think that they're going really fast, but really, the facts show that those are actually some of the slowest ducks out there, especially compared to that canvasback going 72 miles per hour. That's pretty serious.
Can't argue with the facts. But it's just, and I think what that demonstrates is just because a bird is the fastest doesn't mean it's the hardest to hit, to shoot, to connect with. Because, last week or 2 weeks ago, we were hunting in Arkansas, and we had a flock of green-winged teal come in, and you see them, they circle, they come back, you get ready, and then you raise up to shoot, and I can still see it right as 3 times in a row. I pulled the trigger. As soon as I pulled the trigger, the birds moved. It's like somebody else was shooting, and they were like shooting right before me. And so when they would shoot, the bird would zip, and they would. Just like bam, bam, bam. Every time I pulled the trigger, I'm like, yep, missed. Knew it.
You
like,
flock shot them.
No, I didn't. I was singled on one bird.
Excuses.
I had one bird, but every time I pulled the trigger, right before I pulled the trigger, that moment it moved. I think it was because the guy next to me was shooting maybe a split second before me, causing those birds to zig and zag. And I'm just like, yeah, okay, you won.
You won. Save your ammo.
That's right. So in terms of whether this is still true, I think for the red-breasted merganser, I'm not aware of any more recent kind of speed records, so to speak. We did talk with Mike Casazza a few years ago about some of their use of this like high resolution GPS tracking information to measure the speed of pintails. I don't remember if they had any other ducks that they were looking at, but in that paper that they produced, there were like several other records from of flight speeds by other waterfowl, and it talked about that table contained sort of how it was determined. Some is determined by radar, some is determined by sort of chasing, either in a plane or a vehicle. But the ones that they're GPS-based measurements are that they're starting to get now, I think you can have a little bit more confidence in those. Some of these where you're like chasing it with a plane or chasing it with a vehicle, it's like, well, is that okay? Maybe that's a speed record, but what does that really mean? So.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, and again, this is another. It's a fun fact. Yeah, this is another
red-breasted merganser.
Another good example of technology being able, like you mentioned, the different transmitters, things like that they can now have on these birds to really, probably say exactly how fast some of these birds are going. So, pretty cool stuff. Well, all right, let's do one more, then we'll wrap it up. I wanted to do this one because I just thought it's just a really, really cool fact. Considering we're referring to these as amazing waterfowl facts, this one's pretty
fun
amazing.
Fowl facts.
Fun, you can call it whatever you want.
Fun fowl facts.
So this one's called Seasoned Traveler.
Or fantastic fowl facts.
That's a good alliteration there. So Seasoned Traveler, a pintail banded in 1940 in Athabasca, Alberta, survived until January 1954 when it was shot near Nacuspana, Mexico, roughly 3,000 miles away. So if this pintail migrated between these two locations every year throughout its known lifetime, the bird would have logged nearly 80,000 air miles. That's pretty impressive.
It's really impressive.
Now, that's what I call an amazing waterfowl fact.
You're still not going with me on that, are you? Fantastic fowl fact.
Fantastic fowl fact. All right. We'll go with it.
And we are another thing that GPS tracking devices are allowing us to see more often are some of these amazing feats of waterfowl. There was a pintail, I think, that we've seen in social media here recently, a record of a pintail traveling from, I forget where it was marked, maybe, I don't know, but it went to Japan, maybe it was marked in Alberta, went to Japan, then came back up, and then the next year migrated south to Louisiana, or I may have that wrong or something. I may have those reversed, but it's just incredible. Yeah. And we're able to document these intercontinental movements. Now, we've known they've occurred because you get band recoveries and all that type of stuff, but you wouldn't, from band recoveries alone, you would not have been able to determine that bird went across multiple flyways because you only get a banding location typically, unless you get lucky and recapture it. You only get a banding location and a recovery location. So from that standpoint, let's say it was recovered in, I don't know where it was, let's say it was recovered in Japan, but it was marked in Alberta, you would have only had those 2 points, and that would have documented intercontinental travel, but it would not have documented sort of intercontinental and interflyway travel. So it's these GPS tracking devices are just putting data to the things that we suspected or otherwise kind of already knew from one reason, in one way or another, knew were happening out there. So just amazing birds.
Yeah, and another good excuse to reference cool science and research that's going on.
There you go.
So, Mike, this has been great. We'll go ahead and wrap this up. Maybe we'll try and get another amazing waterfowl facts, or what is it? Fun facts show.
Fun fowl facts or fantastic fowl facts.
There you go. Fantastic fowl facts. We will try this one more time. fantastic fowl facts.
You got it.
Cool, Mike. This has been awesome.
Thanks, Chris. I've enjoyed.
I'd like to thank my co-host, Dr. Mike Brasher, for coming on and sharing some amazing waterfowl facts. Fowl fun facts. Fun fowl facts. I'd like to thank Chris Isaac, our producer, for putting the show together and getting it out to you. And I'd like to thank you, the listener, for joining us on the DU podcast and supporting wetlands conservation.
Fantastic fowl facts.
You said fun, fantastic fowl facts.
Oh, no, I don't think I ever said four. Fantastical fowl facts. I either said fun fowl facts or
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit www.ducks.org/DU podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the ducks. Stay tuned to the ducks.